Welcome to the Atrium stage. Next up, Automobility 4.0. New ops, new players, new roles.
I'm going to set this over. Well, thank you all, and welcome to our afternoon session here on Automobility 4.0, or I probably should say more appropriately, welcome to the future. So we're going to take a kind of a peek behind the curtain, if you will, behind the pit stop of really what are the new opportunities? Who are the new players? Where are they being incubated? Which ones exist today? And what are the new rules? Literally going from the racetrack to the street and beyond with automobility. And again, certainly the automobile is certainly center of that, if you will, the epicenter of all that nexus of everything's happening. But there's a lot of other dimensions we'll talk about today as well. How many folks were here last year? Some of the things we saw. Anybody? Good, good. Well, we got a lot to get through. I'm going to kind of just frame a few things up here and then turn it over to our rock stars here to give you a lot more of the content. So basically, it is no longer just disruption. Disruption is arguably changing everything by design, but there's also elements that are happening that are complementary. Things are happening in industry that are of choice. They'll coexist. Basically, disruptive technologies don't totally eliminate existing technologies, but what they do is eliminate companies. Don't be one of those companies. So the technologies will coexist, so will complementary, so will disruptive players all along the way. How many folks have seen the movie The Faster Horse? Movie about the Mustang and Ford. Very good movie. It's not about that anymore. For years, SEMA was all about going faster. Well, today, part of that is really about getting smarter. So we're moving from kind of a Hot Wheels generation into what I'll call the Smart Wheels generation. How many folks had a Hot Wheels? They're a kid. It made it cool, right? For $1, you could have that car. Mongoose, whatever it might have been. Well, what's that kid, boy or girl, thinking of today that makes the auto industry cool? There's a lot of things you're going to see here in the next 45 minutes of why the auto industry is so cool and what that smart wheel toy may be that gets that kid into that career that we'll be hearing up here in 30 years. Some of us that may be here in 30 years. If we kind of look ahead, I stole this slide from the world's fastest Indian. If you look at that top shelf, that's all the stuff of the traditional auto industry, particularly focused on making cars cooler, faster, whatever it is you wanted to personalize. So you see all those typical components. Take a look at that bottom shelf. So it's not the offerings to the gods of speed, it's offering to the gods of autonomy today. So you've got NVIDIA PX2 GPU processors, Velodyne LiDARs, Mobileye cameras. That is the shelf parts bin for creating a lot of these opportunities in Automobility 4.0 that we're going to talk about, and the players that go along with them, and most importantly, the opportunities that get created from the product development as well as the manufacturing. And the point is, it takes a lot of different thinking to get us to 4.0. If you think of design thinking, which is basically the product and the technology content, you also have to have the social thinking that we'll talk about, which is basically the social and branding context. So you need the content and the context to actually come together in synchronization for you. So we got a great lineup of speakers here. We've got Ted Serbinski is going to kick it off from Managing Director of Techstars Mobility. Great stuff right over here if you haven't been through the hall. Started off with maybe, 6 or 8 companies, Ted, 3-4 years ago?
Yep.
215 are back here today. Pretty cool. You'll hear more about that from Ted. Certainly Matt Jones, SVP. You may know of him from a lot of the Virgin stuff that you did, back with Hyperloop, et cetera, Jaguar Land Rover. Software and mobility, software engineering mobility expert. Glad to have you here, Matt. And some of the folks you may not have heard of, Mouse McCoy, CEO and founder of HackRod. HackRod's really going to give us a picture of that advanced product development and advanced manufacturing that I mentioned. You're going to get a glimpse of the future that's here today that's driving a lot of what we'll be doing tomorrow. So glad you're here, Mouse. Thank you. And certainly, as you've always heard me talk, racing is the gemba, the front line for problem solving and technology demonstration on the world stage. So going from the track to the street. So we've got Rod Chong here, Deputy CEO of RoboRace. Unbelievable what RoboRace is doing. Driverless race cars. And a lot of people ask me, John, as an enthusiast, SEMA, why are you so high on automated driving? Number one factor is safety performance. Saves lives. 94% of the accidents and deaths are caused by human error. They can remove that. So it's basically safety performance in the extreme environment of racing, making us all smarter through AI and machine language. So thanks for being here, Rod. And to kind of bring it on home, it's Kurt Steidl, former director of Michigan Department of Transportation, now SVP at Econolite, CEO of the American Center for Mobility right now. So lots of great things to how do you tie all that infrastructure together with all these other parts of the ecosystem that we're going to go through. So I'm going to turn it over really quickly to you, Ted. Take it away for Techstars Mobility.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ted Serbinsky, Managing Director of the Mobility Program for Techstars right here in Detroit. Sorry. Techstars is a worldwide network that helps entrepreneurs succeed. And over the last decade, we've helped 2,000 startups go from idea to acquisition and even IPO. Those startups are in all kinds of different industries, all around the world, different countries, different technologies. And the primary way that we help those entrepreneurs succeed is through our 90-day accelerator programs. We have over 40 of these programs around the world that invest $120,000 in each company at a time. And we take 10 companies every year through one of these programs around the world, transforming these individuals, these entrepreneurs from small teams, accelerating their businesses, helping them to fundraise, and turn into very big businesses and really transforming the world. And I run our program right here in Detroit, the Mobility Program. When we launched this program over 5 years ago, what was mobility? We didn't know if that was the right word or not. Was it connected car? Was it automotive? Was it something else? And I think what Bill Ford's done and his thought leadership over a decade of thinking about mobility as a human right and helping people access food, shelter, healthcare, and beyond, his fund, Fontanals, really played an important role in just shaping our thinking of how to invest in the future of mobility when we had no idea what we were looking for. At Techstars, we invest in the best entrepreneurs, the best people. That's our premise. We invest so early. There's no metrics. There's no revenue. Often there's even no product. And so we have to take a bet on people that they're going to transform the world, build that future that we're hoping to see, that better place. And over the last 5 years here in Detroit, we've invested in 44 startups. They've actually come from 8 different countries. And what's remarkable is only 2 of those have come from Michigan, and only 1 of those from San Francisco. So 41 interesting mobility startups that have raised over $90 million are not coming from this ecosystem or even Silicon Valley. And so that innovation is really global. And John's point, all these new players are not in the obvious places. They're coming from all over the globe.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Ted. And so up next is going to be Matt Jones. And give us your perspective, Matt. You've been quite a few different places, and you're seeing a lot of new opportunities.
Absolutely. So for those that don't know, until very recently, I was leading all of the software and the infrastructure developments at Virgin Hyperloop One. And actually, Virgin Hyperloop was a real eye-opener. And feeding off what Ted's just said, we don't develop a car to go on a car ride. We develop a form of transportation that is from an end-to-end journey, in the same way as Hyperloop. And in the same way as Hyperloop had the ability to change the way people thought about time and space. Can you imagine a time where you could live in LA but be in San Francisco in 40 minutes? That's huge amounts of change that we could expect within our lifetimes, probably in the next 10 years. Sure. But the fact that you could potentially pour out 100,000 people an hour into maybe the Cobo Center, all coming from Chicago, would be fantastic. But 100,000 people for most of the year aren't going to have their final destination as the Cobo Center. How do they then move on to their true final destinations? Probably using multimodal transportation, maybe shared ownership cars, maybe Uber, Lyft, autonomous vehicles of the future. And how do they then navigate to their final destinations? And that is really the essence that autonomous vehicles, that the Hyperloops of the future, all of these forms of transportation are seeking to solve. But it is a global solution that we're looking for. If I look at the infotainment departments of the big OEMs at the moment, they're still massively looking to compete with the smartphone that you might have in your pocket now, but 2 years later. And if I look at any Uber ride, any airport today, if I took one of you in the audience and say, how do you use an Uber? I can pretty much guarantee that you'll be looking at your device, you'll call the Uber, you'll get into the back of the vehicle, you'll say hello to the driver, you'll look at your device that you have in your pocket at the whole time. Until you get to the other end, you'll say goodbye to the driver and thank you. Now, what does autonomy really do for that experience? Well, there's no driver, you don't have to say hello and you don't have to say goodbye. But if we look at how people are using transportation, it's all about their device. And the OEMs don't need to compete with that device, they need to embrace it and ultimately understand how they can provide services that are related to the transportation, the comfort, the convenience, potentially robo-racing, whatever that is going forwards, but not trying to compete with other ecosystems, because we won't keep up.
Absolutely.
That should be the focus as we go forward.
That's good. And good point on the compete. As I mentioned, the complementary ecosystem dimensions coming together. I mean, Hyperloop, great example, complementing either the first mile, mid-mile, last mile transportation, all that right there. And as I mentioned, we're going to take a look at kind of a peek of the future here. So next up is going to be Mouse McCoy, and he's founder and CEO of Hackrod. Anybody hear of Hackrod before? Interesting. I think you're going to be pretty excited from what you see. So can we show Mouse's? You want to show your video first? So let's run the Hackrod video first. Thank you.
Imagine that you could design and build the car of your dreams as easy as playing a video game. The Hackrod digital manufacturing platform, powered by Siemens, is connecting virtual reality with artificial intelligence and advanced manufacturing to make this dream a reality. To prove this out, we started by sketching La Bandita, the car that we wanted, but nobody made. Quickly moving from sketch to full-scale photoreal 3D model in virtual reality. Allowing us to perfect the design and aerodynamics digitally. Moving back into the physical world and connecting with the Internet of Things. We deployed sensors and scanners to capture 50 years of automotive knowledge. We harvested massive data sets and used them to teach the artificial intelligence generative design engine what a car experiences. With artificial intelligence and machine learning, we have the power of hundreds of engineers at our fingertips, allowing us to grow optimized engineering solutions for our design requirements. These designs are too complex and expensive for traditional manufacturing. They have to be 3D printed. The synergy between Siemens software and hardware is allowing us to lead the way in large-scale 3D printing.
Really going well, Jim. We're doing things that have never been done before.
The fact that we'll be able to optimize for manufacturing and buildability, it'll open the doors.
We'll be first.
It's a realization. It's not pixie dust and unicorns.
We are now printing a full-scale car in aluminum. La Bandita is not a concept car. It's a proof of concept of an entirely new way to design and manufacture. And if you can build a car this way, you can build anything.
That's some pretty cool shit.
Yeah, we're having some fun. And I think cool is the word, but cool in the fact of having what you think is cool. And this idea of, consumers become the creator of experiences and things in their life on an industrial scale, and we're all at Hot Router, so mobility is definitely in our focus. But I think the important thing to think about in the context of hot routing, John, where you come from, big part of this town, its roots, its heritage was in hot rodding. But if you take that idea, that spirit, and you give those kids the keys to Industry 4.0, and all of a sudden they're going to have the power of Ford Motor Company at their fingertips. That's just where we're headed. So product creation, ideation through manufacturing, the barriers of entry are about to be pancaked flat, and it's a really inspired time because people with ideas are going to be able to realize them, and you're going to see an entirely new wave of entrepreneurship in mobility.
That's cool. So 3 kids with a dream in a garage can compete.
Absolutely. But the thing I think is interesting is those 3 kids aren't going to be bound by the BS infrastructure of these large corporations that can't get out of their own way. They're actually, when you think about clean sheeting a company in Industry 4.0, one of the biggest problems that the OEMs have in the large companies is their legacy systems overall. They just can't get out of their own way. And I think the classic example, and I saw it last week at CES, see the GoPro booth over there, right? Well, Kodak was filing for bankruptcy when GoPro was IPO for billions of dollars and Kodak held the patents. How did that happen? But it did, and it's happening all over. And I think, as you said, the thing is, we're looking at business models dying, not just companies. But
Yep. Don't be a Kodak moment, right? So how many folks have been to Goodwood? Anybody over in London? Pretty cool, right? I mean, how many folks saw the robocar go up the hill course? Unbelievable. So next up is Rod Chong for Robo Race. Do you want to show your video first, or up to you? Can we show that? Yeah, here we go. So let's show the Robo Race video first, TechCrunch. That is cool. I mean, any comments there? I mean, what are we going to do here?
More awake now? So that is introduction to our new, I don't really want to call it a car. We've decided that we should call them racing robots. But that is an introduction to our new machine, which will be launching shortly. So if you look back on the history of car, going back to this when these driverless carriages first showed up in cities in the 1800s, we know that racing and motorsports went along hand in hand with the development, the storyline of car. And it was on the racetrack that we saw many new engineering solutions would appear, from the disc brake in 1953, the rear view mirror at the first Indy 500. There's so many examples of new engineering solutions appeared first on the racetrack. There's also many examples of new engineering solutions which maybe they weren't invented on the racetrack, but they certainly were showcased in racing. The radial tire and turbocharging are very good examples of that, with Renault and F1 in the late 70s and Porsche in the early 70s. But in more recent times, that's not really the case now. If you have a major innovation, it usually is banned immediately. And racing itself tends to be more attached to marketing departments. So our goal is to, when we look at things through that lens, is to see how can we make racing relevant to where we know car is going. I think everyone here understands that 5, 10 years from now, what we see on the city streets will not really resemble what's happening now. I don't even know if the machines that we see on the road should be called cars. They probably should be called automobiles. That'd probably be a better word to use. So the question is, if storyline of cars going like this and it's being disrupted right now, it's going to go over here, is racing going to continue going on its merry way this way? Which it, with the exception maybe of Formula E, which we're partnered with, the racing industry itself is continuing along its merry way. We see ourselves as one of these solutions to make racing relevant into the future. So you could look at robo-race as taking the most relevant parts of racing and motorsports, and then us also looking at the most relevant parts of esports and racing gaming, and designing something from the ground up that completely reinvents what it will be like to participate in racing in the future. The current paradigm now is that you can say, what is a racing team? You could say it's usually one driver, or if it's endurance racing, 2, 3 drivers, a car, pit crew, support staff. In our minds, we have to completely reset this, and in our minds, a racing team should include 1,000 kids, a AI driver, and a human driver. As you can see, the new car can have a human driver or the AI driver, and everyone can participate in these things. And we're also looking at new forms of entertainment, which include augmented reality, XR, so that everyone that goes to an event is participating in what the actual outcome of the event. So it's basically a science fiction video game come to life.
Love it. Yeah, so don't make the mistake of thinking that racing robots is about taking the race car driver out of the car. It's 100 times more than that. It's changing the industry.
We've pivoted what we've been doing. Those of you who are familiar with Robocar, which doesn't have a cockpit, that's the racing robot that went up the Goodwood Hill climb last year. That's still part of our inventory, but we have this other new machine, which we showcased here, which can have human and AI control. So we're launching our first race series this year. It'll be in Europe, and then it's also coming to the US later this year, which we'll announce in about a month or so.
We'll have it here in 2020, June. So, good. So how does all this fit in together? The entire infrastructure. Again, you got drivers or no drivers. You got machine language, artificial intelligence. The infrastructure, Kirk. I mean, you've been involved with that for your whole career, and how that's coming together and where it's going.
It is. So those that don't know, I retired from the Michigan Department of Transportation after 30 years and 13 years as a director, and pushed a lot of technology integration into the infrastructure side. And most of you probably don't know some of the assets that are sitting right here in Southeast Michigan. You know, if you look at automotive R&D, 75% of the North America's R&D is done here, and that's 370 some companies. And my new role is with Econolite Systems, which is traffic management systems, and it's focused on the infrastructure. It's the traffic signals. So I'm really excited by the folks that are here and some of the cool stuff that's happening. Now, my old job and my new job is to say, all right, how do we take that technology and now how do we make it street legal? Because what I just saw in those last 2 videos probably not going to be street legal, but it's going to zip right along. And then how do we bring government along, and how do we bring agencies along to really embrace the technology and help pushing it forward? And then how do you harness this ability of all of these services that provide mobility for the general public? And that leads to 2 of the big assets we have in the state of Michigan. One, M-City, which is at the University of Michigan North Campus, and then the American Center for Mobility, which is at the Willow Run Airport, just adjacent to it. It's the site of the old General Motors Hydromatic plant. It's the site that used to build B-24 bombers. So could we play that video? as I mentioned, the American Center for Mobility was built on top of the old General Motors plant, the old bomber plant. The bomber plant was known as the Arsenal Democracy. And we really take that heritage seriously and say, this is the place that before that, Henry Ford actually taught people how to be farmers, so from an education standpoint. Then created used his assembly line to build bombers to help win the war. Now it's the place where the mobility of the future is being defined. It is, as you saw in that video, has so many unique attributes that you can't find anywhere else on the globe or anywhere on the planet. A 700-foot curved tunnel is absolutely not replicated anywhere else. You can do the testing in the middle of winter, middle of summer. We just last week introduced snow making capability. And you might think, wait, we're in a northern climate, why do we need to make snow? If you looked outside, it hasn't snowed this winter. We got people that want to test in snow. We now have snow making capability. You know, you can't do that in Mountain View, California. So it's a very unique facility, one that the state of Michigan has helped move along, but it's a public-private partnership, it's a nonprofit, and more than 60% of its funding has come from industry partners. So if you haven't seen it and you're in this space, I'd encourage you to come take a look. Now, John, as everybody was talking here, my new job, I have an office in Anaheim, California, so I'm looking forward to that 45-minute trip where I get from LA to San Francisco. I'd like 45 minutes from Anaheim to LAX.
You're not going to be able to do Anaheim to Anaheim in 45 minutes in LA.
That's right.
Very good. Excellent. This is my favorite part. And this is, I want you to put on your thinking caps too. We're going to get some dialogue and conversation going with these experts we have here. And again, I think so many ways we can talk about the new opportunities, the new players, the new rules, and as you saw, some of the new tools. And I've always said that cars are works of art, access, power, fashion, and fun. And as Neil Young said a long time ago, he says, there's different kinds of cool. It's your interpretation of what's cool. What I see is not just the product, as you said, Rod, just the car. It's the industry is becoming cool again. What are some of your thoughts on that? I mean, with all the new players coming in through Techstars, there's got to be a cool factor with the technology that they want to implement. And jump right in, guys.
Well, I'd like to hit on the arsenal of democracy, really because we're entering the age of the democratization of engineering, design, and manufacturing. And that is just a really, really big deal. And to that point, I want to hit something you said, well, those cars probably won't be legal. Well, we have to really always now think we're in the age of the digital twin. So we have a digital twin, which is down to the molecular composition of an entire system for mobility, car, motorcycle, and advanced simulation, that we can run that digital twin over and over, all the way through crash, and actually simulate it. When that's correlated with quantified manufacturing, that's a big deal, and you will be able to have low volume mobility solutions that are certified. But it should be digital, and that also, I think, will look at getting regulation out of the way that's totally legacy and from the last century.
Yeah.
On the subject of cool, that's an interesting one. If you look back on the relationship between youth culture and car, say in the 1960s, youth culture was car, right? If you look at the Beach Boys songs, for example, they'd write about that. The relationship between youth culture and cars changed quite a bit. I don't think you could say that digital natives look at vehicles more than transportation appliances, sadly. Yep. What we're doing with RoboRace is we are looking to take this segment and this movement with mobility and make it exciting, fun, inspirational. Certainly anyone that sees our vehicles in person, and especially kids, they tend to have quite a visceral reaction to them. They have real presence, almost soul. So we believe that it is important that there are ways to inspire and excite people and ultimately build confidence as well. We need to find a scenario in the future where a parent feels comfortable to put their kid into one of these transportation appliances, if you want to call it that, and send that pod off to school. Yeah. I believe we're a little bit away from that right now.
Exactly, and I think it is. It's the industry being cool, the technology being cool. I mean, Tony Stark and people like that, Starband, and
But we do see it changing. So can anybody remember the first time they went go-karting as a child? And how many of you wanted a go-kart as soon as you left?
Absolutely.
So I took my nephews, aged 10 and 13, go-karting at Christmas. And they came off the track and they said, oh, that was bumpy. Do you think we could have a radio-controlled version? And I'm like, okay. But can you see that projected 5 years into the future where potentially just like Robo-Race, those same children in 5, 10 years, they're like, I don't want to actually control this thing. How can I optimize the algorithms to go to that next level? But that comes back to the democratization. If I create a control model for an autonomous vehicle today, other than some 3D printed parts, other than potentially Robo-Race, how can I even test that? And it probably is, as you were saying, the digital domain to start with. Yesterday I was in the showcase looking at companies like Metamoto, who everybody walks past and go, oh, that's just a video game simulation of autonomous driving. No, it's not. That's the capability of spinning up 1 million machines and doing 1 billion miles of testing while your engineer sleeps for the night. And it's this difference that we're going to go through that hopefully the next generation of engineers can help bring to it as we're going forwards.
Yeah, I think you made a great point. And as we look at Industry 4.0, one of the big things that all the McKinseys and the consulting groups have left out of those Industry 4.0 diagrams is gaming engine. So we think that the future of manufacturing is going to be gamified. Engineering design will become a game. As you said, kids are growing up expecting everything to work like a social network in a video game. Both of us are doing all our design work in photoreal 3D VR in a game engine, so it's coming together, and that's really a big deal.
But think about the world that we're describing going forwards. When I was sat at Jaguar Land Rover, I reported to the director of vehicle engineering, Dave Nesbitt, great guy, and he would openly describe himself as a mechanical knuckle dragger. And that seems offensive. He was saying about himself, so I feel I can replay on this stage. But if you look at any of the classic automotive companies, you've got generic automotive engineers, mechanical engineers, skilled gearbox engineers. How many of those teams have the software skills, even the PLM skills, the ITS skills that we need to really go to the next level where it's digitally defined, digitally controlled infrastructure? And I used to say a long time ago, we're looking at a company like Tesla. Where would you rather be? Would you rather have 1,000 software engineers and need to hire 4 gearbox engineers? Or would you have 1,000 gearbox engineers and need to try and find software engineers? And I think Techstars and others are really trying to highlight that. But I guess you just don't know what you don't know. And if you're not willing to look outside the bounds of your existing tier 1 base, the OEM base, it can be challenging to see that.
And that's what we're seeing. I think just a democratization of knowledge, but also access to capital, access to resources to be able to build these things. Decades ago, trying to start a startup, it's millions of dollars and you have to be in the right networks to know the right people. Today, you can go online, open up a GitHub account, any open source software that you guys put out there, download that, run it in a simulation, and you could raise some money through friends and family on one of the Kickstarter or one of those platforms, and all of a sudden you can be taking down these massive companies that have billions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of employees, and you're a kid somewhere in Africa or Asia just coming up with this idea, envisioning this future. And to us, when we look at Techstars and investing, it's really investing in those people. We don't have a concept of what the future mobility looks like. And in fact, we actually dropped the word mobility from our name here in Detroit. I think it's a misleading, it was a good word for a while, but it's also misleading. I think the video mouse played when artificial intelligence, industrial 4.0, 3D printing, the word mobility is the auto industry embraces it. Everything upstairs this is mobility. It's a car that maybe drives itself and can be a taxi, but to us, like the movement of people and goods is so much bigger than that. And I think gaming's a great word. Like when you think of gaming, you may not think of mobility. And so when we
Gamification is also another good word.
Right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
One other trend that everyone should be considering is that we know is coming is when augmented reality hits mass. Absolutely. Or you could say XR, people are saying now, the combination of mixed reality, virtual reality, and augmented reality. When right now most people are addicted to these flat screens this big, right? It's a two-dimensional experience, but all that content, everything that's in there, whether it's gaming or you're doing social media or you're doing your work, all that is going to be outside and it's going to be in three-dimensional space, especially once we all have our augmented reality glasses. And when that happens, you're going to see pretty seismic shifts in how we all connect to each other, how we connect to devices, transportation, entertainment. And this is a thing from our organization that we're getting ready for.
Go ahead, Kurt, please.
So, earlier, Mouse and I were having a conversation. He was talking about the digital twin of ACM or a city, and this last piece, I think, really fits in there. And he had an amazing concept, of how we use a facility like ACM, where you take, the two kids in a garage, right? They're connected through TED. That connects through a grant from Planet M to get some track time or whatever. They got their facility there. They're running it in their simulation, knowing how it's going to fit. And then the beauty is, we at ACM really believe simulation is the way to go, because you are not going to drive. I mean, you could drive millions of miles and never encounter the same situation twice. And all of a sudden that car's out there and encounters a situation it doesn't know about, and it's going to have to react positively. So I think there's just tremendous energy. This conversation has been fantastic. And I think there's just great opportunities coming.
And I guess expanding on that, is there a concept of a digital twin for ACM? Is there like a Unity model, et cetera, that can be downloaded? Do people know about that?
Actually, so there is a 3D point cloud already made of ACM, and we'd love to work with people about that.
Yeah, and you're seeing a lot of that digital twinning, if you will. A lot of the racetracks looking for new revenue are digitizing, math modeling their racetracks to get those edge cases out there and literally bringing that math model into it so they can have that digital twin and offer those as edge cases to the automakers for the testing.
So, this is rad to tie all the three things together. If you think we had a full simulation of ACM, and then we are actually running a car around it, the feedback loops, the IoT feedback loops, are going to go straight into generative algorithms, and we'll be optimizing chassis design for specific requirement like you are in a video game, but it's actually connected to the digital twin and optimized for manufacturing at the same time. Yep. That was like out there wild, and we are doing it for real today.
Yep, and if you take the idea of generative design that we've talked about, and certainly the additive manufacturing, move that to the talent side. I think this is where you really come in, Ted. Matt, you're part of it. Yeah. People like Connor, Ledwidge out there, the young folks out there that get it. The digital twin, from a talent perspective, to me, you've got Dearborn. I'm just picking on Ford for a second. And you got Corktown with a train station. The digital twin is the train station of Dearborn. So how are those two cultures going to come together to create these products that we're talking about? And I grew up in Corktown, so I love it. Mm-hmm. I'm glad to see that. But those are two gears, one spinning at 10,000 RPM, or what's the chip speed of something else? Two chips coming together. Who's going to sensor fuse those two cultures?
One thing we're doing with RoboRace is it's our aim to take professional industrial simulation, some of which uses game engines like Unreal, for example, or Unity, and combine those with entertainment or esports simulation. So right now there tends to be a line between the two, and those two worlds don't mix. We talk about adding democratization to things. Well, what if the kids and the gamers and the esports sim racers also can bridge over into this other professional or engineering-led simulated world, and those two worlds can combine? And it's that structure that we're building at RoboRace, looking to break that down.
Kids are very comfortable with that. Very comfortable.
Yeah.
And if we think about what Mouse has just been saying about having this direct feedback loop on the track, well, why can't that be cars on the road? And why can't some of the OEMs, Daimler and BMW, start collaborating and sharing this data? And we've talked for a long time on stages like this about, well, if there's a traffic accident, why can't a car start to send data to all the other cars in that area? V2X, V2 infrastructure, whatever that is. Can we go to that next level and actually start to put in place industry standards where it's not just a traffic sign recognition? Maybe it's the point cloud. Maybe it's assisting in training the autonomous vehicles trailing your vehicle. Maybe it's identifying where the snowdrifts are. All of these different pieces that could easily be implemented with collaboration of the different software teams within the OEMs. Now, if I go and visit Ted at Techstars, I'm absolutely sure that all of these different companies are bouncing ideas off each other, working out how they can share APIs in the cloud. If I go to the industrial IoT, Siemens and GE and all of these competitor companies are working because they recognize that all of these different machines have to work to produce something, I don't know, like a car. So what will it really take to get the OEMs and the tier ones and all the other players in this
Didn't the airline
ecosystem?
industry, didn't all the,
Exactly.
isn't that a good case study?
Yeah.
Airline industry did this. They all worked together to raise safety standards internationally.
But strangely about mobility, if we went and took 3 trucks, they've got standardized messages running on standardized buses, even though they come from different manufacturers. So it's not even that we can't do it within the large, heavy automotive industry of trucks. What's stopping us? What psychological boundary is there that's stopping us standardizing?
I think what's stopping us is just the history of this region. If you look at kind of Detroit being the birthplace of auto, you have Ford and Dearborn, GM, Warren, Chrysler up there. It's just this physical area has all these silos. And when you look at just Silicon Valley, just Apple, Facebook, Google, there's just all these employees in like a much denser area, the sharing of ideas, the flowing of ideas. And to your point about this area downstairs versus upstairs, when you go to, there's 50, 60 startups over here, they're all sharing ideas, similar spaces. Oh, this is a good approach, this is a different approach. If you were to go upstairs, it's like I'm in my GM booth or Ford booth or whatever booth. I can't say anything about what I'm working on. There's just this history of not sharing knowledge. And we're seeing all these new startups, these new approaches where the competitive advantage is the sharing of knowledge to create that value.
I see that it's a bit the Wild West right now, that there's a lot of groups coming in. If you look at the development of automated driving simulation or communication protocols, there are several different groups who are looking to become the standard, some of which are related to hardware and software development simulated environments. Some are just other simulation-only environments. Some are protocol standards. And there are different groups that are trying to lock down what they're doing as these standards.
And a lot of those companies who are participating in those limited groups, if we look at some of the bigger autonomous companies, they think it's all so proprietary to them. Because they don't share that, actually, if you look into these different companies, it's actually very similar. And none of it is actually related to the intellectual property of their main features, which is really the autonomous control models. But the worst bit is, and this is an unadulterated plug for Geneva, we've had alliances, sorry, John, we've had alliances that Ted's a part of and others are a part of for 10 years, standardizing these different elements, being successful in infotainment and connectivity. But because the future of autonomy and the future of electrification is seen as so critical, it seems that there's this artificial barrier within some of these companies that don't want to share because it might give one of their competitors a leg up. When in reality, if we were sharing, it would probably accelerate everybody.
Well, I think one of the big problems or what's holding everybody back, we need to talk about the cyber to the physical. Industry 4.0 is the connection of cyber to physical. But we're entering a moment, because tooling is the boundary right now that creates the valley of death. And we're tooled up here for just to do one thing. But we're entering the era where we're going to be able to 3D print large scale, validated, certified structural alloy. That changes everything.
Yep.
So this moment's happened, the Big Bang's gone off this year. I definitely think we're leading it. But that's also going to be the last mile of the digital thread right now, and all the magic, because the OEMs see it, they see simulations, see it all, but they're like, what can we do with it? We're not tooled up, we're not going to commit to tooling for low volume, so they're stuck. So we are going to see the last mile, which is the digital thread runs into a brick wall, and Industry 4.0 is not complete because of the tooling barrier. Now that last mile is being cleared, it's going to open up entirely new business models for creation.
Absolutely.
And I think just to your point there, that when I've talked to some OEMs and suppliers, or we want to add and incorporate artificial intelligence, it's not in one part of your company, it's your entire company, your entire flow from your design to production and then back. And the challenge of these big existing companies is you don't just plug in, buy a module and hope it works. You have to rethink your entire company, and that's the fundamental challenge and why upstarts like what you guys are doing have a huge leg up when you're building software first.
Yep, there's startups and upstarts. I like that.
And-
Two last rounds of lightning questions. We'll start with you, Kirk. If Henry Ford was sitting over here or Steve Jobs was over here, take your pick, what would they say over the last 45 minutes? Bullshit, good stuff? What do you think they'd say?
So I think part of them would have this, a bit of this history that says, wait, maybe. But I think the innovative part of the young them would say, you're right on.
Okay, good, like that. Rod.
I think interesting to say, well, what version of them?
Right.
Are
Yeah,
they
who do you
really
want,
young, or
Henry or Steve?
the startup versions of them comparing notes?
Right.
Or is it the most established versions? I look at Steve Jobs and I see someone that was able to look at the music industry, and when Napster came in, that started disrupting that industry, and he was able to bring all the big corporations to the table, come up with a solution, force them to sign, and iTunes and iPod, and it was able to come up with the next version. I don't know if that was Music Industry 5.0 or Music Industry 9.0, but there was a number there.
That's
Definitely
a good
was
precedent
2.
of what's happening.
So I think he would look at, I think they would both look at what's happening now, and Henry Ford would probably look at the transition from horse and carriage to driverless carriage to car, and then Steve Jobs would look at the transition that he might have successfully done in the music industry, and they hopefully would have recognized that that is just starting, and this major disruption is coming through. Where we're going to end up 5-10 years from now, I think the whole industry is going to look quite different.
And they were both futurist visionaries. Mouse, Henry or Steve?
Well, I don't think Henry would build River Rouge again. Henry completely revolutionized 20th century manufacturing. We all know the story. You can have any car you want as long as it's black. Well, now you can have any car you want as long as it's different. So I think instead of a monolithic factory, he would be looking at a distributed model without question, and most likely build what will look like factory as social network. And as far as Steve, I think Steve's design eye is going to be, and his value on design is going to be liberated. One of the best things about where we're headed is that we're entering an era where you're going to have design without compromise. And one of the most important things for me, and I think it is for you too, John, when we get back to cool or having what you want is cool, is that great design is going to prevail. Great design will be available to the everyman, not just the elite. You know, you can walk around here and say, oh, that car's cool, I could never afford it. Well, we're going to be in an era, once again, where great design will be in our lives.
Excellent. Matt?
So if this was Steve, and given that we've been listening to, participating in panels on similar topics for at least the 3 years, he would be quite open to say, why the hell are you still talking about this? Why isn't industry adopting it? Can you imagine if he'd have left the iPod for another 3 years? We'd all have Microsoft Zunes in your pocket. Didn't happen. Let's just get on with this. Is there anything that we've said that's too controversial? What's stopping us? He would have hit it out the park 2 years ago.
I think battery technology is one thing that's slowing things a little bit.
Exactly. And then I just with Henry Ford introducing kind of that assembly line over 100 years ago, when we look at how our car is made today, it's pretty much the same thing. It's more advanced, but it's the same fundamental difference. And so I think to your point there, Matt, we need to rethink entirely how they're built, and it's not using the assembly line anymore and that traditional line. It's that software-first approach. It's distribution, 3D printing. If we're going to shake things up, we have to start at that very first concept of how it's made. And to your point, what's taken so long? Yeah. Well, I guess they're already started, right?
Mouse is ahead.
I don't know. We're having fun. But I like what you just said once again about battery technology. It is a real limiting factor. No Moore's law. We see a lot of ideas about electric propulsion in vehicles, but until solid state gets here, I think we're kind of spinning our wheels, really.
Spinning the wheels. Well, I think we're over time, but I'm going to step over the border real fast. Couple word answers, starting with you, Ted. What's the biggest thing this audience needs to know, take away from our session today?
I think from my perspective, innovation's global. It's not in the places that TechCrunch, the news talks about, it's everywhere all around the world.
Everywhere. Like that. Matt.
Disruption is here. It's a digital future with distributed teams.
Beautiful. Thank you. House.
I say for everybody out there, I don't see that many young people out here, but pass the word to your kids, your friends, that the future's bright and that kids should be dreaming big, that anything's possible on an industrial scale in their future.
Love it. Rod.
I think we all need to be ready for a world which is going to be quite dissimilar to what we see now. I think it was a year ago at the Economic World Summit in Dubai. There was an expert, I don't know who the expert was, but they're saying that in the next 30 years, we're going to see the amount of human progress, if we want to call it progress, of the last 3,000 years of human history. That's going to all happen in our lifetime. So let's get ready.
That's a great takeaway. Kurt, wrap it up.
Yep, last comment. So I'll bring it back to today. If there's startups that are there, people that are working with TED, and you want to come see what's going on at the American Center for Mobility, go see Planet M. There's some startup grants that help you get going, help you get some testing. You can use at ACM, you could use at M-City. So come see us. It's a great place. Come take a look.
Well, please join me in thanking our wonderful speakers here. Thank you all for being here, and thank you guys very much.